So I want to welcome everyone to our August advocacy meeting. And we're delighted to have Laura with Disability Rights Florida talk about voting and civic engagement. So I'm gonna let her go ahead and take it away. And she's got her screen up so she can go ahead and move forward.
Hi, everyone. I am Laura Minutello. I'm a public policy analyst at Disability Rights Florida. Previous to that, I was the voting access advocate at Disability Rights Florida and have been in the civic engagement space a while. The nonpartisan civic engagement space, it's really close to my heart. And as a person with a disability, I have cerebral palsy. Voting rights for people with disabilities is particularly close to my heart. So as Dina said, we're just going to go through voting rights and ways to be civically engaged. We're going to talk through some accessible options and answer any questions, hopefully answer any questions that you all have. So what is Disability Rights Florida? For those of you that don't know, Disability Rights Florida is the protection and advocacy agency for the state of Florida. There is one in every state and territory, and what we do is provide legal and advocacy services for those with disabilities. In the 70s, there was an expose done by Geraldo Rivera. Those of you who are my age or older may remember Geraldo. But if you don't know, Geraldo was a TV news anchor at the time, and he did an expose about the Willowbrook Institution on Long Island, which led to the closing and the move away from institutionalization. So in that aftermath, the P&A system was created by the Developmentally Disabled Assistance Act, introduced by Jacob Javits to protect the rights of people with disabilities. We currently work across 10 or more grants, including what we call our Protection and Advocacy for Voter Assistance grant. And that is the grant that DRF does its voting work under, which we aim to help those with disabilities exercise their voting rights in a private and independent way, which is a federally protected right. And DRF is part of something called the Rev Up campaign, which is run by the American Association of People with Disabilities. It's essentially their national voting initiative. And the Florida chapter of that is the Access the Vote Florida, which DRF participates in and helps facilitate. And we meet every other Friday at 11 a.m. and would love to have any or all of you join. We're a group of self-advocates as well as providers and generally people that care about voting rights and people that care about voting rights of the disability community. So what Rev Up's goal is to increase civic engagement and interactions with the voting process, as well as educate lawmakers and reach out to candidates, especially in a presidential election year. So to start off, I have a question for you, and I'll answer this as well too. But if you all wanted to answer this either with a raise of your hand or in the chat or however you're comfortable. Why do you vote, or why do you think you should vote?
We can allow people to unmute themselves, Laura, if they want to answer.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
Or put it in the chat.
Yeah, however anybody's comfortable. I'll give you all a minute, and like I said, I'll answer as well.
Okay, we've got one that says civic duty.
That's a great reason.
Yes. Thanks, Sandra. Janelle says our future depends on it. And the question is, why do we vote?
Yes.
Jorge says vote or be quiet. That's true as well.
Yep.
We need to elect those that support our interests. And it's also our voice is another reason why we vote.
Yeah, absolutely. I resonate with all of those. I think for me, the last one that you read, Dina, is just the fact of, especially being a person with a disability, we know that people with disabilities, there is a disability voter gap, and people with disabilities are less likely to vote. There's a study out of Rutgers done by Doug Schur and Lisa Cruz, which are professors at Rutgers, that estimates people with disabilities are up to, depending on the election cycle, 3 times less likely to vote. But that's not because we care less. In fact, it was shown that people with disabilities often care more. We care about our interests. We just don't feel that a lot of times we either don't feel that our voices are heard, or there's actual barriers, which there are barriers for a lot of communities. It's not just the disability community, but there are particular barriers for those with disabilities. So I think as a person with a disability myself, I definitely feel like our interests and our voice depends on me getting out there. I saw a few more. I can't see the chat, but I can see that there's answers in the chat. Did we read all of them?
They were reiterating that it's your choice to vote, it's your right, it's a way to get the word out.
Okay, yeah, awesome. Well, all those are great answers. And on your voice matters, we kind of said that, that was the consensus. And so those of you that are around the disability community, or part of the disability community, may know the phrase "nothing about us without us." That was kind of the rallying, or is the rallying cry of the disability rights movement, which is still going on. And it actually started with the apartheid movement in South Africa. And it's something, and I always just like to tell that story because it's something that the disability rights movement borrowed, but really has rung true for us. A lot of times people with disabilities are left from the table, right? And so voting is a way to bring your voice to the table. Also, people with disabilities rarely serve as elected officials. We have seen that more lately. There are elected officials with disabilities. At the federal level, Tammy Duckworth is one. There was Madison Cawthorn a while ago. There are a few, but generally speaking, people with disabilities don't serve in elected office. Joe Biden has a stutter, as most of us know, and even in the divisiveness of the presidential election on both sides, this is nonpartisan, and both sides do it. Disability is often used as a disqualifying reason, right? There is a lot of, to this day, the disability community had to fight hard for even a statue of Franklin Roosevelt, who was, as we know, in a wheelchair most of the time. In his memorial, the disability community fought very hard for that statue to depict his wheelchair, because the consensus, even up into 2000, was that wasn't how he was publicly seen. But we know that he served 3 terms, most of them from a wheelchair. So it's not that elected officials don't have disabilities. It's just that they are less likely to serve, and then even those that do may feel pressure to minimize them, or in some cases it may be used as a disqualifying reason. It's important for people with disabilities to speak up and advocate about what's important to us so that our voices are represented. Again, that's what we kind of said. That's why the majority of us said that we vote. Lawmakers, and this touches into civic engagement in general. So when you're talking to a lawmaker, they can argue, numbers and statistics, but it's hard to argue with the person in front of you. And so your personal story, although, sometimes it doesn't seem like it's powerful, a lot of times that can move the needle. So it's really important to not only vote, but to interact with your legislature. Now, what are the voting rights of people with disabilities? They're generally speaking the same as any other individual. So there are two, broadly speaking, ways that a person can be disqualified from voting. One is certain felonies automatically disqualify you from voting, murder, capital offenses, things like that. And other felonies, if you haven't had your right to vote restored, which does involve completing the terms of one sentence and paying all fines and fees, can also, until that's done, can also stop you from voting. Or if you are convicted of a felony in another state that would stop you from voting in that state, you also can't vote. The other reason is that you are under a total plenary guardianship. A plenary guardianship will generally take all your rights, whereas if you're under any other type of guardianship, the right to vote has to be explicitly removed. So if a guardianship is not plenary, chances are that that individual or you yourself has the right to vote, which is most people. If you have the right to vote, you have the right to do so privately and independently. The Help of America Vote Act of 2000 was conceived after the 2000 election in Florida. Those of us of certain age will remember George Bush versus Al Gore and the hanging chads and Florida's role in that. But one of the things that came out of that was more protection to private and independent vote. So now there's required to be in every federal election one accessible voting machine, which it allows you to vote via touchscreen, and then it does a few other things, and we actually have videos that we will go through that show you how to operate those. There's generally two types of voting machines. You can also have assistance from anyone of your choice in voting other than your employer or a union representative. And by assistance of anyone of your choice, they can read to you. They can actually mark your ballot as long as they don't tell you who to vote for. Nobody can tell you who to vote for, and nobody can stop you from voting, but they can mark your ballot. You as an individual can bring in a sample ballot with your choices marked, or something that reminds you of the choices that you wanted to make. And you can sign with an X or a signature stamp if you can't sign your name. Generally, it's good to have those things on file with the supervisor of elections office before an election. But let's say you can't sign your name and you don't have that, like the supervisor of election doesn't know, you can still vote. It will just be voted provisionally, which means that they will you'll cast your ballot, and then there will be some follow-up processes around voting. But the inability to sign your name doesn't stop you from voting either. There are no tests for voting. Nobody can dictate your choices. And then there are also physical accessibility concerns with poll sites. So a lot of poll sites, particularly on election day, are churches. Churches are exempt from the Americans with Disabilities Act, meaning they don't have to usually be accessible. Churches or other places of worship are exempt. It's not just churches, but that when they are holding an election, there are those accessibility requirements. So you have to be able to get in to the door and get to the polling place the same way you would in any other polling place, even if a church or place of worship or some other building has some ADA exemptions or lesser requirements. If it was historical, same thing. And these are protected rights, federally and state. Listed out a couple of the state laws: the ADA, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the Voting Accessibility for the Elderly and Handicapped, and the National Voter Registration Act. But the important thing to remember is that these are protected rights. So if you feel that your rights are being violated, there are processes you can go through to make sure that they are honored, and that's true of yourself or anyone you serve, including calling DRF. So what are the different ways to vote? You can vote in person early in election day. If you vote early, you can vote at any poll site in your county. If you vote on election day, your voter information card will have the address of your poll site, and you have to use that one. You can vote by mail, including regular vote by mail or accessible vote by mail, which we also have a video on that we'll show in a second. But generally, since 2020, all 67 counties have an accessible vote by mail program that allows those with disabilities and print impairment to receive their ballot electronically, vote via the computer, and their screen reading technology or whatever technology they use, and then print that out and return it. And that's the big kind of barrier there, is that you still do have to print out your ballot. A lot of people, particularly those that are print impaired, that's some barriers that we're still working through, trying to see if we can make the remote vote by mail fully accessible, and via Dropbox. So or what the state now calls secure ballot intake stations, and those are the boxes that you'll see at SOE offices and other places around the county. Now, it's important to note that as far as returning a ballot, you either have to do it yourself or you have to have an immediate family member. So your mother, your brother, your spouse do that. Or if not an immediate family member, you can only return 2 ballots, so yours and 2 others. So in the past, there were organizations that would, especially for people with disabilities, come and pick up ballots or help in other ways. That is a problem. For those in nursing homes or ALFs, there's also what's called supervised facility voting, which requires 5 residents to want to vote. And then the administrator of that facility makes a request to the supervisor of elections in that county, and then the county can come out and administer the election in the facility. But it only applies via state law to nursing homes and assisted living facilities, so small group homes and things like that. It does not apply to at this particular moment. So how do we register to vote? You can register to vote online at registertovoteflorida.gov. You can register to vote by mail, which would require you to download the application, or you can register to vote in person at a supervisor of elections office, divisions of elections location, places like the DMV, public voter registration agencies such as libraries, or anywhere that serves people with disabilities, or you can use things like a third-party voter registration organization, which DRF itself is a third-party voter registration organization. Those are things like the League of Women Voters, and so all of those are options for people wanting to register to vote. And you can also check your voter registration status at that same register to vote link. And then we did have a few explainer videos about the accessible voting machines. There are 2. What one is used will depend on your county. I don't know off of the top of my head which counties of all 67 use what, but DRF itself does have a list, or can help you find that information if you were curious as to what one was used. But I'll at least play one of these so that you guys can get a feel for how the in-person accessible voting machines work. Can you all hear that?
No, I think you're going to have to turn it up a little.
Okay, hold on. You can't hear anything, or is it just too low?
We can't hear the video.
Okay. I think it should allow me to share the audio.
It might work better if you actually pull it up in a web browser and share that. And Laura, you are muted now for some reason.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now, yes.
Okay, I'm gonna just give me 1 second to just pull that up in the browser.
No, that's fine. I think that might work a little better.
Yeah, I'm gonna stop sharing the screen for a second.
So while Laura is working on that, I will tell everyone we are going to send a copy of the presentation out to everyone that attended today. And as usual, we will place it on our YouTube channel for others to share and view as well.
Okay, let me see if this will work now.
Supervisor of Elections.
See if you can turn it up a little bit.
Okay, yeah, can you hear it at all?
A little bit, but I'm wondering if you can adjust the volume.
Okay, hold, yeah, let me.
And if we can't get it to work, we can share it.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
email
Let me
to
just try
everybody.
one more
Right.
thing, but if not, it is actually in the presentation itself too. So
Okay,
if you're sending
great.
out those slides, and I can also send you the links to that. So it will definitely be able to be shared. And I can just talk generally about what it is, what they go over if we can't get it to work. But I'll try one more thing. No.
No.
Okay.
Okay, well, we'll make sure everyone gets it with the presentation.
All right. Let me share my screen again. And then I can kind of walk you guys through what generally the accessible voting machine does, and then we'll share it out.
You still have access to share your screen?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay. So generally both accessible voting machines use a keypad and will allow you to select via touchscreen the choices that you want. It can also read the ballot to you in several languages, and you can use paddles. So if you don't have the use of your hands, or you can use the paddles with your feet or another part of your body. It can hook up a sip and puff for those that might need a sip and puff device with the straw to operate the machine. And so generally it will take you through the same ballot. Well, it will not generally, it'll take you through the same ballot that a non-accessible machine will, but with those added features. It will also let you know if you voted for something twice. And there is a privacy screen attached to the accessible voting machine so that your vote is private. We do see a lot of those, and this is something to be aware of. We see sometimes those facing towards doors or places where people can see. That is not okay, and you as a voter have every right to ask a poll worker to move a machine so that you can use it. So that is generally what they do, but the videos will explain more fully how to use the machine. It'll go step by step in that process. And then there's also we have voting explainers for the accessible vote by mail. There are also two versions of that through Enhanced Voting or Democracy Live. depending on your county. And again, we're more than happy. I'm more than happy to tell you or to try to direct you as to which your county uses. But generally, each county does it a little differently, but generally you'll sign up for vote by mail. And what you'll do is you'll actually request 2 ballots. So when you're signing up for vote by mail, there should be a box that says accessible vote by mail. And what they will do is send you 2 ballots. You'll get a regular paper ballot, which you don't return. And then you will get a link or some kind of access, usually a link in your email, to the accessible ballot. And then you can vote via your computer, giving credentials that they will just supply to you on the computer. So it allows people with print impairment or that are fully blind to use their own screen reading technology and things like that. And then you're going to print that out, put that in the vote by mail return sleeve, and return it the same way that you would a regular vote by mail ballot, whether that be the mailbox, in person at a supervisors of elections, or poll site, or in a Dropbox. So that is the kind of quick overview of those. I wish we had the video working because it does a lot better job of going step by step than I just did, but hopefully that'll give you at least some of an idea. And then, kind of to wrap up and then take your questions as you have them. I wanted to talk through some other ways that we could be civically engaged as people and people with disabilities. One of a simple way to do that is to join a community or association coalition like Access the Vote that deals with the rights of people with disabilities, or maybe that's something, maybe it's not disability voting that you're interested in particularly, but finding a group of people that cares about what you do. A lot of times, especially around a presidential election, there will be forums or town hall meetings or candidate forums where you can meet candidates and ask questions. You can always write or call your elected officials, whether that's on the federal or state level. And then you can have a meeting with them. And one of the best ways to do that, I know that everybody kind of focuses on, and it's important to advocate during legislative session if you can, but during the off months, so right now, like during the summer, a lot of times elected officials, especially your state representatives, have more time. You can volunteer on a campaign, you can register to vote, you can do all kinds of things. One thing that I always like to remind people too that often gets forgotten is local races. So think about your school board, think about your county commissioner, think about your waste management and your garbage man. A lot of those are elected positions, and those are really, really important. We sometimes don't put as much of a spotlight on them as the presidential election or things like that, but just being involved on that local level is really important. Also, it doesn't always take it just doesn't take doing any of these things to be civically engaged. Maybe there's a student in school, your student council or your local advocacy group. I know there's a large self-advocates network in the state, and so that's kind of some of my suggestions. I'm just curious, do any of you all have other things that you do and ways that you're civically engaged that you could share?
So again, you can unmute yourself and shout it out or put it in the chat.
Stand Up for Independence is a trainer for accessing the vote in the Treasure Coast area.
Thank
Awesome.
you, Kelly. So Janelle says that she is a supported employment liaison and helps by advocating at meetings.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, especially, and that, that's really important for those of you that aren't people, and I don't know, I don't want to assume, Janelle, that you aren't, but if those of you that maybe aren't people with disabilities, to come alongside and be an ally, and help advocate. But I'll as a person with a disability, I'll put the emphasis on the word help. And I think that regardless of disability, we want to remember the principles of self-determination. And so that to me is central to voting, that ability to direct your choices and your life. And so any ways that we can, as a disability community, have allies without disabilities is great, but we just want to remember to also center the disabled voices. And again, that wasn't a trying to say that that's not being done. I just, as a person with a disability, I just feel like it is, and that's Laura speaking, not necessarily DRF, that it's just always important to remember that the best way to help advocate as an ally is to help the person with a disability that you're supporting advocate for themselves. But that is a whole other subject. So yeah, but no, those are great examples. And so I know that this is running a little bit short because we weren't able to play the videos, but does anybody have any questions? Do you have any other insights? I always like to ask people when I do presentations about their own insights about a subject, because I think that we all have something to bring to the table, and you're all here today, and so I like to learn as much from those that I'm presenting to as hopefully you've learned during this. So any questions or discussion?
We can go ahead and open it up for questions, comments.
Yeah, hi, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Hi, this is Laura Mahetsky. I'm a support coordinator. I have a question on maybe you could give us a little advice on how you would advise caregivers who assist people in voting, especially if they want to take them to a voting booth and do this. What kind of suggestions you have for them?
That is a great question. Unfortunately, because it is a federally protected right, we do a lot of times see resistance to this in poll workers. But my first suggestion would be to let them know that it is a federally protected right to assist. It should that individual want their assistance, and that's the key. Is the person, if the person wants their assistance, no matter who it is, as long as it doesn't fall under the employer or union representative, if it's mom, dad, Aunt Mary, hired PCA, it doesn't matter. They have the right to go into the voting area with them and read the ballot, mark the ballot, assist in any way that person needs. The statute actually doesn't prescribe how that's done, as long as they are not actively persuading the person of choices. So I would say the first thing to know is that is a federally protected right. And then secondly, honestly, my advice, if there are any problems, would be to speak to the poll captain, or there should be like a precinct captain. And then if you are all, or you're still given problems, DRF itself actually during voting season has a voting hotline. It's on the screen. But I'll read out the number too. It's 877-352-7337. And our staff, and at least at the moment, primarily me, will answer that. And so we would be able to help advocate on that person's behalf. They can also call the county supervisor of elections. So I understand that that's a lot to do as you're sitting there voting. And in and around that, if you think that there's going to be problems or that might be an issue, my best advice, and again, this is not perfect because this is what we're talking about, is an actual barrier and shouldn't exist. Like, there should not be problems, would be to vote early. Or, because if it's election day, yes, those things can be done, but it's more of a time limited situation. If somebody votes early, while it's not, they shouldn't have to have this issue and then come back. That's not, I'm not saying that that's an acceptable solution, but if that happens, there's more time to rectify the situation. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, makes a lot of sense. Is there, when somebody registers to vote, and if they have a disability, or limitations that interfere with how they vote, is there a form that is there a special form that's filled out saying that or is
No.
is
So
it-
no, you are allowed, you're just allowed the assistance of your choice. So they're not even, I mean, people should not even ask technically, it's a violation to ask about disability. So if, I mean, not that it should happen this way, but if anybody kind of walked in there and was like, I had a disability and I want this person to assist me, there should not be any question on that. That is a violation of federal law. Again, not a perfect answer because we do know that happens, unfortunately. And so a lot of the DRFs work around that, particularly, and that's all I can kind of speak to, is educating the SOEs, the supervisor of elections, and trying to up that training of the poll workers so that doesn't happen. But it is an issue. I wish I had a better answer for that, but no, there's not a form. I mean, that would cause other rights violations potentially in a whole other way. So my best answer is that it is a federal requirement, and that if that is being violated, that needs to be handled legally.
Hey, Laura, we do have a hand up. Katrina,
Yeah.
you want to ask your question? Katrina?
I'm sorry, I was muted in two ways. I'm sorry. Good afternoon.
Hi.
Thank you for this insightful and informative presentation. Your last response has led me to another question about accommodations. So how do you prepare for various needs if you don't know what they might be? Like, how do you make sure that the polling place is sufficient to accommodate folks?
Okay, so that is actually a good, really, really good question. And there are ADA requirements for polling places. There's actually a checklist called the ADA checklist for polling places that prescribe what those physical, at least in the physical sense, what those accommodations should be. So ramps, parking spaces, and the like. And so DRF, actually in the election cycle, every election cycle, but particularly in presidential election cycles, will go out on election day, some of our staff, and to various counties around the state and check for the physical accessibility of the poll sites. So that is a requirement. As far as anything that's maybe not, and then it is also a requirement to have the accessible voting machine there. And if you're told that that isn't there, and you need it, again, you know, you should kind of call us or call your supervisor of elections. As far as any non-physical barriers or you know, I actually, this is just a personal anecdote, but I have a family member with a intellectual disability who wanted to vote and voted for the first time recently. And so what I did to help her at her request to prepare for vote is go through that sample ballot and just kind of answer any questions she had and not prescribe who she should vote for or why, but kind of I find that the sample ballot or explaining, you know, kind of, because even the sample ballot, and this is the problem, because the language on those is not plain language. It's not even plain language for those without disabilities. A lot of times it's legalese, so kind of helping to explain things like the amendments or any plain language resources that explain the ballot, which DRF is actually working on, would be kind of my prep. But letting your loved one, if they would like to, you know, kind of asking them would they like to practice, that would be my best bet. And you know, kind of on that note, as far as anybody can vote, anybody can assist anybody to vote. I know for my loved one, her at the time, you know, 9-year-old son helped her vote. So it really can be anyone. There's no, it could be you know, it could be whoever you want. And so he was able to assist her in the ways that she needed. But does that answer your question? Or
yes. Yes, thank you. That's very informative. The initial question I had was about encouraging and promoting engagement at local levels. This is partisan, but for example, your Democratic Executive Committee, which is at a local level. And so what would be the best way to try and engage people that have ability differences in participating, number one? And I know that like Microsoft has this accessibility link, right, for people that may have visual specifications as well as audio specifications, right, to make it more user friendly if you're doing a PowerPoint or something. But if you're doing like a webinar type meeting or an in-person meeting, just trying to find out what kinds of things you should have available maybe, but also how do you get to this population of people who want to be involved in that grassroots aspect?
Great question. So I'm gonna take the you know, what kind of things you should have available first, and then I'll come back to the other one.
Okay.
I would always suggest that there is a ASL interpreter, that there is that you also too, I think a lot of times with ASL, and I think, you know, I've even been guilty of this, you know, in events that we just assume that it's ASL, but do they need Spanish interpretation? Is there some other language? You obviously want to make sure that it's physically accessible, but I think the most important thing as far as accessibility of an event is to have those basic things, and, you know, have the captioners, obviously, if you're doing something virtually, but also to just generally ask, you know, what people need, like what accommodations make this possible for you to attend. Is that, you know, that we need to have a hybrid event so that you can both people can attend in person, or online. I mean, we see that a lot. And I don't want to speak for everybody with disabilities, but I know that, you know, hybrid events tend to be harder to put on, but even having that virtual option available alongside the in-person one, I think can make a difference for a lot of people with disabilities. But generally I would just flat out ask the question is what do your attendees need? But just also having those basic resources, so ASL interpretation, captions, physical accessibility, large print, and then to answer your next question and getting involved in space, you know, people involved in spaces, I think that's a harder one. But I think it's important to talk to the people, you know, and if they want to be involved, you know, I don't know your particular role, but whatever, you know, you can do to make that happen, whether that's helping with transportation, helping them find transportation, talking, or having them connect, not talking for them, but connecting them to these organizers and talking to the organizers of the Democratic caucus or any Republican caucus, any of these events, you know, kind of grassroots about the inclusion of disability, because we do know that across the board, nonpartisan, both sides, neither one a lot of times is accessible. So just kind of raising that to the actual organizations themselves can help. But I think it comes down to whatever the barrier for the particular person or persons that you're trying to engage are, I think will be your answer. If it's that they need support to participate, I think you provide that support. If they need somebody to go with them, if they need plain language explainers for, you know, different things, I think that is all kind of in bounds. I know that that's not really an answer, but it really is.
Yes, it is. Yeah, it's a great answer. Yeah.
It's hard to
So,
give a black and white answer when it really is
right.
so person dependent. But I would say if I had one suggestion that I think was like a takeaway was actually talking to the grassroots organizers of these different events and just bringing up accessibility generally. I see. So hopefully that was helpful. And I'm
Yes.
also available to talk, you know, with any of you. My email is on the screen. But I will make sure to read that out too. It's lauram@disabilityrightsflorida.org. And so I'm happy to, you know, if you want to shoot me any other questions. But I do see we have another hand up.
Thank you.
Sandra has her hand up. Sandra, do you want to ask your question?
Yes. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, so my name is Sandra B, and I am the parent as well as a caregiver of a person with disabilities, an adult person, and I just want to share what I do with him for voting. Even though we live in the same household, our political views are completely different. So when it comes time to helping him, to assisting him, I don't want to influence him in any way. The first time he voted, he did in person, so we got a sample ballot. We reviewed it, we went online, we looked at the different candidates and what they had to offer, and it was up to him to make that selection. I did not influence him at all. I read it to him, explained in layman terms, and then I said, okay, it's up to you, go ahead and decide. So when he went to vote, he took his sample ballot with him, and he went in by himself and he did his thing. And then we started receiving mail-in ballots, which gave us more time because in addition to reading the news articles, sometimes the candidates make appearances on the local station. So I always call him and say, oh, look, such and such a person is, you'll have to, you know, you may want to vote for him, listen to what he has to say. So that helps him, again, to make his own decisions And I know that I'm not supposed to influence him in any way. So whatever he decides, if I don't like it, oh well, I don't like it. That's my, that's my cross to bear. But just giving him, I guess, the freedom of choice. He has a right to vote. I am his advocate, and one of the things that's stipulated is that he is able to vote. So, giving him that freedom to make his selection, but not influencing him. And so far, it's worked really well. So, once he casts his vote, he can put on his little sticker that says he voted. And if anyone were to ever ask him, he can say, well, my mom doesn't tell me how to vote. She sometimes reads the stuff to me, but that's it. So I just wanted to, to share that as one of the things that I do for my son.
Great.
Absolutely
Thanks
a
so much, Sandra.
fantastic example and the right way to do it. And kudos to you and your son. And, as a person with a disability, just I can attest to that is the right way to be like you're saying, be a supporter, but not influence it. So I'm so glad you shared that. That makes me so happy. And is absolutely the exact correct example that people should be following.
Well, again, we thank Laura so much for taking the time to talk to us about voting. We are going to put this video on our YouTube channel probably later today or tomorrow, and we will send out the slides to all attendees. So
yes, and feel free to, like I said, email me. And my email is on the side, my contact information. Call DRF if you have any questions. I'd be happy to answer them. But ultimately, thank you for having me.